Me, the wife everyone forgot. My name is Madison Carter, and I'm 29 years old. I grew up in a sun-baked town tucked somewhere off the edge of Oklahoma, where everyone thinks they know everything about everyone else. It's the kind of place where old secrets are as easy to stumble on as uneven sidewalks, and every neighbor has a front row seat to your life, whether you want them to or not. I used to think growing up in a close-knit community was a blessing, until I found out how easily rumors catch fire, and how quickly people will choose sides, often not yours.
You know who this
I was
is.
just 24 when I fell in love with Michael
This is
Carter.
Madison.
He was charming in that
Start
steady,
talking now.
Oklahoma way.
Look, she's sitting
The
right
kind
there.
of guy you pictured riding a tractor or fixing your dad's porch swing. After our wedding, I moved in with him and his family. When you imagine becoming a wife, you picture laughter echoing in the kitchen and stories traded over coffee at night. But it didn't work out that way for me. Michael's family was huge, loud, laughing, and completely loyal. Unfortunately, they were loyal to each other in ways that sometimes squeezed out newcomers like me. And in the middle of it all was his younger sister, Tiffany, with her honeyed voice and sharp smile. Tiffany had a knack for storytelling, often at someone else's expense. If she said I forgot to do something or misbehaved at dinner, the whole family took it as gospel. It didn't help that Michael, who I thought would be my ally, always seemed to take her side, quietly brushing off my protests with that gentle, "You know how Tiff is." Every day, it felt like I was shrinking, a little less visible, a little more isolated. I'd walk into the kitchen and feel the shift in conversation, the subtle glances. I tried everything to fit in, overcompensating with kindness, staying up late to help with chores, laughing at stories I didn't find funny. Nothing changed. If anything, the walls closed in harder. The worst part was realizing how easily love can warp under the weight of other people's expectations. Michael started coming home later, standing a little farther away in the living room, until eventually he wasn't standing in my corner at all. I tried to speak up for myself, to plead my case, but my words seemed to vanish into the tiled floor. Maybe it's dramatic to say I became invisible, but that's exactly what it felt like. Living in the same house as these people, sharing the same table, while somehow not existing to anyone at all. My biggest regret isn't just that I lost my place in their home. It's that I started to lose myself. But I guess that's where all of this really begins. His family, the birthplace of injustice. Moving into Adam's family home was like navigating a maze that changed every day. Walls shifted, doors opened and slammed closed for reasons that never made sense to me. His family was big and as interconnected as vines on a garden fence. There was his father, Richard, who ran the local hardware store and measured respect in silent glances and hard work. His mother, Jean, was the town's unofficial event planner, always bustling between bake sales and charity picnics, her pearls tight around her throat and her manner tighter still. Adam had 3 siblings: Lucas, born leader and second in line at the store; Molly, whose laughter was sharp as broken glass; and Emily, the youngest, a force of nature with a silver tongue. From my first day, I sensed a quiet audition going on, as if I was expected to hit my cues, but never given a script. The manners were Southern sweet, smiles, polite hugs, but beneath them ran judgment sharper than any kitchen knife. Molly would casually mention family traditions I'd never heard of, then raise an eyebrow as if testing whether I'd ask or pretend to understand. Emily, well, Emily could undermine a person just by blinking. She loved stories, sometimes true, sometimes not, always told in a way that made her the favorite and me the afterthought. It didn't take long for small misunderstandings to pile up. An innocent comment I made about the town festival twisted into a rumor that I looked down on their traditions. Someone's missing apron became my fault, even when I hadn't been home. Every week there was something else. A birthday I supposedly ignored. A promise I apparently broke. I tried to defend myself, but my voice got lost between raised voices, in eyes that never quite met mine. Adam's family never yelled, not directly. They were too polite for that. Instead, they made their disappointment known in other ways. A teapot slammed a bit too hard, smiling through gritted teeth, conversations that always ended just as I stepped into the room. There were family votes about tiny decisions: where to put the Christmas tree, when to paint the porch, and somehow, my opinions were either ignored or gently overruled. I stopped volunteering ideas. I stopped speaking up at all. The worst part was Adam's silence. I thought he'd notice, that he'd catch on to the way I was slowly disappearing in his world. But Adam was born into that house, and its rules were in his bones. Most nights, I'd wait for him to ask how I was, to stand by me just once, but he'd only repeat his family's side. Assuming everything was a misunderstanding I'd overblown, he'd pat my hand. Just give it time, Rach. They'll come around. But time didn't soften them. If anything, it made them harder. Jean started organizing chores, splitting them up, but my list was always longest. And if anything went wrong, a burnt casserole, a forgotten errand, all fingers pointed at me. I grew tired, not angry, not sad, just exhausted from carrying blame that never belonged to me. Over the months, I felt the walls close in. The friendly waves from neighbors turned into thin-lipped nods, as if my reputation in that house had seeped out onto Main Street and stained every part of my life. I realized, with a stone-heavy heart, that justice in that house belonged to those who controlled the story, and I wasn't even holding the pen. Being kicked out, the unwanted road. There are memories that sting less with time, and then there are wounds that ache if you breathe wrong. The night I was told to leave the Miller home is one of those wounds. It's been over 7 years, and I can still remember every detail. The bone-deep ache in my chest, the taste of salt and iron from tears bitten back. The slow, methodical way I packed my bags as if leaving quietly would somehow hurt less. It started, fittingly, with one more rumor. One last accusation flung by Lindsay after a family dinner I'd cooked almost entirely by myself. Someone's necklace had gone missing. A cheap trinket, really, but enough for Lindsay to arch an eyebrow in my direction and murmur about how things started disappearing after I arrived. That was all it took. The whispers began again, quiet at first, then growing bolder. Mama Miller pursed her lips, as if sizing me up for the first time. Sam, planted by the window, said nothing at all. That evening, the family gathered in the living room. I remember the hush, like the town before a thunderstorm. Lindsay's voice was soft, but lethal, as she quietly recounted my supposed missteps. Forgotten chores, misremembered birthdays, small kindnesses I'd never performed. Aunt Norma nodded along. Uncle Greg shook his head sadly. I looked around for Sam, willing him to speak, to defend me, but his eyes stayed on the floor. It felt like my heart was shrinking, a sharp, paper-thin thing folding in on itself. When Mama Miller finally said, "Rachel, maybe it's best for everyone if you take some time away from the house." Her voice was unyielding behind that practiced politeness. There were no raised voices, just the gentle iron of small-town justice. No one called it what it was, a banishment. They just stood there, silent, waiting for me to agree. I didn't beg. I was too tired. Instead, I packed quietly. The house was silent except for my suitcase zipping shut. Nobody came to help, but nobody stopped me either. I walked down that long hallway for the last time, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight, like they, too, wanted to reject me. As I stepped out into the sticky July night, I felt every eye watching from behind tight curtains. Later, while waiting on a bench at the empty bus station, my phone buzzed once. Sam, with a single text. "I'm sorry, maybe this is for the best." I stared at the words until they blurred into nothing. In that hour, I felt more alone than I had in my whole life. For the next few days, I had nowhere to go but a run-down motel by the interstate. My savings were thin. The world outside was huge and humming and strange. The first morning, I woke thinking I'd dreamt the whole thing. Then I saw my bags, neatly stacked under a flickering bulb, and remembered I was nobody's wife, nobody's daughter-in-law, not even the subject of a local rumor anymore. I was simply Rachel again, standing at mile zero of an unwanted road. Everything I had come to rely on, routine, acceptance, even the gentle weight of Sam's hand, was gone. I ate vending machine food and filled notebooks with letters never sent. I relived every conversation, wondering what words I could have changed, how I might have pleaded my case. Guilt and anger tangled in knots inside me. Sometimes I convinced myself I deserved this exile, and other times I felt a hot fury at the injustice. Then, after a week, something changed. I woke up to the sun crawling through grimy curtains and realized I was still breathing, still here. Survival, I decided, would be my silent protest. If the Miller family believed I didn't belong, I was going to prove, if only to myself, that I absolutely did, somewhere. I checked out of the motel, bought a one-way ticket west, and walked into my unknown future with nothing but 2 suitcases and the stubborn flicker of hope that had somehow survived everything. New life, from heartache to triumph. Leaving a small town in Oklahoma isn't as simple as driving away. Even after you've packed your bags, cut the engine on Main Street, and pulled into an unfamiliar city, you still have to drag the weight of what you lost along with you. For me, that journey dropped me in Seattle with 2 battered suitcases, a few $100s, and the ghosts of my old life rattling behind every step. I arrived in the city at dawn, sky metallic gray, air sharp with salt and cedar. Everything felt impossibly big. The streets, the crowds, even the stacks of newspapers on the corners. The first room I rented was barely larger than a closet above a pizza place that never seemed to close. So at night, I lay awake, counting the thud of deliveries and the shouts from the sidewalk below. Still, even in that exhaustion, I felt something else. Relief. No one here cared who I was. Nobody had heard the rumors. For the first time in years, I could just be Madison. To pay the bills, I hustled, washed dishes at a bakery in the morning, walked dogs in the rainy afternoons, cleaned offices at midnight. There's a kind of pride you can grow in survival. Knuckles red and raw, but your own. I saved every dollar, skipped every indulgence, learned how to find joy in the little things. A mug of coffee after the pre-dawn shift, the crinkle of a newspaper, the orange of the city lights as they blinked on every evening. After a few months, the bakery's owner, Lena, a blunt, broad-shouldered woman who swore more than she smiled, noticed I'd been sketching recipes on receipt paper. "You bake, kid," she grunted one day. "Go prove it." So I did. I arrived one morning before sunrise and turned unsold croissants into bread pudding, brownies from leftover batter, a lemon pie from memory. Lena didn't say anything right away, but my pastries started showing up in the display case. Soon, Regulars began
I
to
don't know what
ask
she
for the
expected.
new
It's always
girl's
the same
tarts.
thing.
Those small victories
Just
knit
tired,
together,
you know?
day by day, into a life.
It must be
I went back
difficult
to school
navigating the
part-time
admissions
to study
process with your
business,
background.
dreaming of
I assume
someday
she
opening
applied
a
early
place of
decision
my
somewhere
own.
safe.
I started running, badly at first, up the city's wet, winding hills, measuring my progress by each block instead of the heavy ache in my chest. I spoke less and listened more, letting myself open up only when it felt safe. I met friends who cared about my laughter, not my last name. I began to call my dad again, to tell him about my messy, beautiful, exhausting life. Healing, it turns out, is never as fast or dramatic as our stories wish it were. There were nights I cried in the kitchen over a collapsed souffle. Mornings, I nearly called Michael just to hear a familiar voice. But with each month, I realized that my worth wasn't held in anyone else's approval. It was built, slowly, each time I chose to keep going. My exile became my canvas.
This is everything I could
Every
find.
scar, a bit of
Thank you.
texture.
I'll contact you
2
soon.
years later, I opened my first bakery. It wasn't much, just a narrow storefront painted bright yellow on a busy street in Capitol Hill. But it was mine. Early customers would ask, "What made you start this place?" I would just smile and say, "Sometimes you need something sweet at the end of a long, bitter story." They never asked for more details. They didn't need to. Looking back, I know that being cast out wasn't my end. It was the beginning I never thought to wish for. The start of a story where I finally belonged, not because someone else said I did, but because I decided I would. Coming back, stronger than ever, 7 years, floated by faster than I ever imagined. Though for so long, I thought I would never return to that little town in Oklahoma. I hadn't sworn it off because of some dramatic urge to run. It was more the slow, quiet healing of old wounds that never quite closed. With every calendar page I turned in Seattle, every birthday candle blown out in silence, I had wondered, if you go back to the place that broke you, who will you be when you step off the bus? That morning, the sky was pearly gray, with the kind of hush that settles before the world wakes up. I parked my rented Chevy beside the old town square, now dotted with food trucks and fresh layers of paint. The autumn air was sharp with the scent of fried dough and nostalgia. I ran a hand through my hair, now cut short and streaked with copper, and took a shaky breath. I had thought about this moment so many times, my grand return to Willow Springs. Would anyone recognize me? Would the ghosts of gossip cling to my shoes the way red dirt used to? I wore a crimson dress, not because I wanted to show off, but because for years I had let other people pick out my colors, my words, my life. This time, I was choosing something bold, something that shouted, "I'm here." Within minutes, faces from my past drifted into view. Mrs. Harper from the bakery, Mr. Candy, the town clerk, and, most stinging of all, the Carters, bunched together like autumn leaves barely holding on. There was a wrinkle of awkward silence as I walked through the crowd. Some blinked in confusion, others stared, as if trying to puzzle out a half-forgotten name. I just smiled and held my head a little higher. My body didn't tremble the way it once did. I went first to the festival, taking in the rides and the ribboned pies. Children shrieked with laughter, just as they had when I was a girl. For a moment, I let myself slip into the warmth of old memories. A time before neighbors' whispers could slice through skin. And then I heard it, just behind me. A voice, sharp and familiar. Tiffany, no longer the golden-haired favorite, but now a woman cloaked in her own problems. She made a joke I'd once have pretended to laugh at. This time, I turned around and met her gaze, unwavering. "Madison," she said, uncertainty flickering on her lips. Is that really you? I nodded. My voice came out strong, more confident than I felt. It's me. I see you're still the first to know everyone's news. She sniffed. We haven't heard from you in years. People change when they have to. I didn't back down, and to my surprise, neither did she. Our conversation was tense, but honest, in ways our old ones had never been. I realized then how much I'd grown. Other people's opinions weren't oxygen anymore. By noon, word had spread through the festival that I was back. I saw Michael, my ex-husband, across the square, older and wearier than I remembered. He looked at me as if he expected old wounds to gush open, but I just nodded politely. Our story was finished. I didn't owe him or this town anything except the truth of who I'd become. Later, when his mother tried to corner me with a brittle apology wrapped in small-town politeness, I smiled, accepted her words, and gently steered the conversation away from old blame. I wasn't here for vengeance. I was here for myself. Throughout the day, people approached me, some with apologies, some with excuses, many simply curious. I told my story to those willing to listen, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I shared the ways I'd stumbled and rebuilt, the times I'd doubted myself, the victories no one but me had cheered for. The looks they gave me changed, first from guilt, then from something like admiration. I could see it in their eyes. They recognized pieces of themselves in my journey. The ones who had whispered lies in the past now murmured apologies. The ones who had banished me now asked about my bakery, my friends, my life beyond Willow Springs. The power of their judgments had faded, washed out by my own quiet confidence. Walking back to my car that evening, the streets glowing with lamplight and swirling leaves, I stopped in front of the old house where everything had fallen apart. I felt grief stir inside me, honest, but not overwhelming. I was not here to reclaim what I'd lost, but to acknowledge that I had survived, and in doing so, become someone even I had doubted I could be. I stood on those cracked steps for a long while, breathing in the Oklahoma dusk. Then I turned, the weight gone from my shoulders, and blended back into the festival crowd, whole, unapologetic, and stronger than I'd ever been. The truth unearthed. They say the world spins on secrets and stories. Some whispered with a knowing smile. Others buried so deep they seemed destined never to surface at all. For years, the ones that shaped my life lay dormant in the heavy Oklahoma dirt, guarded by tradition, fear, and the kind of loyalty that will turn a blind eye to almost anything. Still, as I walked back into Willow Springs, the urge to dig up the past pulsed inside me, raw and stubborn. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about reclaiming my own narrative. If I had survived everything else, surely I could survive the truth. My return had already upset the natural order of things, quietly at first, then not so quietly. Old faces watched, wary, as I moved through town. I felt the tension in the air, saw how conversations trailed off when I entered a room. The stories they'd once told about me seemed to rise up with the dust. But this time, they met a different woman, someone who was neither ashamed nor willing to disappear a second time. It started, as it so often does in small towns, with a bump into the past. I ran into Jess at the farmer's market, right beside the stand selling home-baked pies. Jess, once the ringleader of the sidelong whispers, looked like she'd been waiting for an encounter ever since my car first rolled into town. Her eyes darted around, checking for an audience. This time, I gave her none of the satisfaction I used to offer. No nervous smile, no attempt to smooth the rough edges of our history. "Madison, you back for good?" she asked. But it was less a question and more a challenge. "I'm back," I said, voice steady. And I have questions of my own. Jess
It used
hesitated,
to be our
lips
favorite
twisting
place.
around the words she'd rehearsed. But honesty isn't something you can practice in the mirror. More people wandered over, pretending to browse apples, but really drawing closer to hear the showdown everyone had waited years for. My chest thudded as I felt the weight of so many eyes, but I didn't flinch. I had learned, over years of solitude and struggle, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay standing. So I started to speak, not from a place of pettiness, but necessity. I talked about the days when rumors went unchecked, about the way my smallest misstep would turn into a family legend at my expense. I detailed the slow isolation, the silent stares over supper, the invisible dividing lines that split the family into two camps, theirs and mine. I mentioned the day of the necklace, the lie that led to my exile, the way evidence was never sought, because, for them, my guilt was already a given. Jess's mask began to slip. She said it wasn't all her doing, that everyone in the family played a part, whether they knew it or not. A few others shuffled closer. The Carters, the Harpers, even the local pastor's wife, who'd once crossed the street to avoid me. Their faces were taut, pale with the knowledge that, after all these years, the truth might finally breathe air. More voices joined, some with accusations, others with brittle denials. The town square felt like a courtroom, memories and regrets echoing louder than the laughter from the festival nearby. And in that tangle of exchanged stories, something unexpected happened. Others began to admit what they remembered, what they overheard that night, what they now regretted not questioning. Aunt Norma conceded that she'd never truly believed I'd stolen anything. Mrs. Harper admitted the rumors sounded strange even at the time, but she hadn't wanted to get involved. Even Michael himself, standing at the edge of the cluster, finally spoke. "I don't know why I didn't listen to you," he said, quieter than I'd ever heard him. "Maybe I was scared of what it would mean, about me, about my family." His words didn't lift the past from my shoulders, but something shifted beneath the weight. I didn't come back needing apologies. I needed clarity, and it was pouring out of these people in awkward, earnest streams. Some cried, some lashed out, others stood frozen in the realization that they hadn't really known what happened, only what they'd been told. Throughout the afternoon, I listened and answered questions with the kind of frankness I'd once been too afraid to risk. There was anger, yes, anger that my years away had been the cost of their comfort. But there was also a wash of relief, the sense of poison drawn from a wound. I described in detail how the smallest lie could reshape a life, how shame and self-doubt could become your only companions in the quiet pre-dawn hours. I recalled how tightly the Miller house held on to its myths, and how willing the town was to let someone else bear the burden of its secrets, so long as it meant keeping the peace. For a while, I wondered if this was all too late, if justice delayed was truly justice. But as more people came forward, breaking their own silences, I saw subtle transformations spark beneath the shame and regret. Eyes that once sliced me apart softened with something like solidarity. I was no longer the town's scapegoat. I was someone who survived, someone who lost her place and fought to build a new one. And that changed the air in Willow Springs more than any explanation ever could. Late in the day, just as the sun bled gold across the town square, Emily, Michael's youngest sister, walked up to me. For years, her jokes and stories had painted me as an outsider. But now, her shoulders sagged, her gaze clear. "Madison, I spread things that weren't true. I was angry. At you. At life. And it was easier to pick a villain than admit I was scared." She didn't cry. Neither did I. The old impulse to forgive instantly wasn't there. Instead, I let her words pierce and settle. Sometimes the cleanest act is to listen, to let others meet their shame, honestly. A few more stepped up, tracing the roots of every half-truth and rumor, piecing together how a web of family loyalty, insecurity, and old-fashioned fear could sabotage a person's life. My own hurt pulsed inside me, raw. But for the first time, I did not feel smaller because of it. Their admissions, late as they were, gave shape to the old void. I told Emily, as I told the others, you don't have to make it right for me. You just have to be honest with yourselves. The only justice I could seek was the kind I could claim. The truth, spoken aloud, witnessed by the people who had once turned away. That evening, the wind was cool, the sky gathering dusk in soft, forgiving shades. As the festival lights flickered on, I stood by the gazebo where children darted, their laughter ringing clear. People approached me in twos and threes, some to apologize, some to defend their actions, some simply to confess they never really understood what they were a part of. I was tired, a kind of bone-deep fatigue that hollowed out the center of me, but also lightheaded, like someone recovering from a long fever. I realized the truth wasn't just about me anymore. It belonged to the whole town. Their chance to confront the ugliness they'd hidden for years, to challenge the reflexes that had built their safety on someone else's pain. As I stood there, I made peace with the idea that full justice might never come, that not everyone would understand or even admit their role. But the silence, at least, was broken. The old story no longer stood unchallenged. Before leaving the festival that night, I took a walk past the old Miller house. The porch light was on, casting long shadows across the chipped steps. I lingered, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. But it was gentler now, a dull pulse instead of a blade. I thought of all the years I'd tried to unravel what had really happened, all the different versions of my story that were told and retold in corners and kitchens. I thought of the girl I used to be, quiet, desperate for approval, easily erased. Now I stood taller, not because the truth had healed everything, but because I had finally faced it on my own terms. I owned my scars. I wore my story openly. I could leave the past here, not as an exile, but as a survivor, an author, a woman who had carved out justice from silence. The next day, the sun rose clean and bright over Willow Springs. I drove out of town with the windows down, hair whipping in the wind, breathing in the sense of a story reclaimed at last. The road ahead was still uncertain, but it was mine to walk. And this time, I carried the truth with me, no longer as a burden, but as the beginning of my freedom. Forgiveness and moving forward. Forgiveness is supposed to feel like freedom, but when you're carrying years of pain, shame, and anger, it's hard even to imagine what real release would look like. I used to think that if I ever got this far, finally facing the people who'd hurt me, speaking my truth in that little Oklahoma town, I'd find some grand, all-consuming sense of peace, rising up and washing all my old wounds clean. The reality was messier, more complicated, and in its own imperfect way, even more beautiful. In the days after my return, in the town's reckoning with my story, I drifted through Willow Springs with a sense of simultaneous relief and exhaustion. I walked the cracked sidewalks and let memories stretch into the present. Laughter from the churchyard, Saturday nights at the pie shop, hushed arguments behind closed front doors. All these pieces made up the patchwork of my life. For better or worse, the air didn't feel as heavy anymore, but the scar tissue underneath all those old wounds still ached when I breathed too deep or let my mind wander back in time. For a while, I thought about what it would mean to forgive the ones who wronged me. Did they deserve it? Would it be a betrayal of everything I'd endured? Of the woman who'd sat alone in that bus station, clutching her suitcase, feeling like the world had ended? I'd survived by being tough, by refusing to let the story written for me be the last word. But you can only armor yourself for so long before the weight of the plates crushes you from the inside out. Forgiveness isn't a single act or a single moment. It's a series of choices you make, breath by breath, day after day, as you decide not to let old ghosts drag you backward. For me, it started with small things. Choosing not to flinch when I passed the Miller house, no longer bracing for cruel whispers or suspicious glares in the grocery store. I let myself walk Main Street with my chin up. I returned kind greetings from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. Sometimes the conversations brought up old hurt, sometimes surprising warmth. I stopped looking for apologies to put everything right. Instead, I opened myself to the possibility that people are more than the worst things they've done. The women who once whispered about me at church now offered shy, halting apologies, or left casseroles by my father's porch. Some, from Sam's mother to Michael's sister, sought me out with tears and confessions. Yet, even when their words stumbled and fell short, I saw the longing in their eyes, the hope that forgiveness would return a piece of them too, not just me. The hardest person to forgive was always myself. No matter how many times I told my story or bore witness to others' regret, part of me huddled in the corner of that motel room, convinced I'd failed on some fundamental level, failed to fight hard enough, to be good enough, to see the betrayal coming before it hit. In the quiet moments before sleep, I caught myself replaying old conversations and rewriting my lines, aching for a graceful exit. I didn't yet understand that survival itself is a victory, and leaving it all was an act of unspeakable self-respect. With time, I began to see forgiveness as a gift I could give myself, whether or not anyone else deserved it. I started writing letters to the people who hurt me, honest, sometimes angry, always unapologetic. I never sent most of them. I wrote Michael a letter that spiraled from rage into sorrow, and eventually, something that felt like gratitude. I wrote to Tiffany and Sam's mother, to the smallest-minded neighbors and the loudest gossips, and finally, to the girl I used to be, the one who didn't know her own strength yet. Some letters I burned, the paper curling into ashes in the fire pit out back. Some I read over and over, savoring the feeling of putting pain into words. The process helped me stitch together a story that belonged entirely to me, one where I wasn't a passive victim, but a survivor with agency, humor, and stubborn hope. As the days slipped into weeks, I found that the more space I gave my pain, the less power it had. The forgiveness I offered, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes silently, wasn't about erasing the damage or letting anyone off the hook. It was about letting myself breathe freely, lifting the burden of resentment so I could face the world as a whole person again. Willow Springs watched me, as if expecting a final act. Would I storm out in fury? Would I stay and build something new? The answer, I realized, was neither. My story wasn't about proving anyone wrong or demanding restitution. It was about finally choosing myself every day instead of waiting for others to give me permission to be happy. I decided to stay a little longer. I accepted invitations to dinners, helped out at church events, and even judged a pie contest alongside some of the townspeople who'd once looked past me like I was a shadow. With every conversation, I felt less like an outsider haunting my old life and more like a woman coming home on her own terms. One afternoon, I met Michael by chance at the farmer's market. He looked older, his eyes ringed with regret. We talked quietly, honestly. He told me he wished he'd listened, really listened, all those years ago. He asked if I could ever forgive him. My answer surprised us both. I already have, I said, meaning it. Not because he deserved it, but because I needed the space in my chest where bitterness used to live. I walked away from that conversation with my head higher, the ache in my heart dulled to a distant memory. Other conversations were harder. Tiffany, always the golden child, struggled to look me in the eye. We sat in the bakery one morning as she stumbled over an apology. I let her words land, heavy and imperfect, but I didn't offer her cheap grace. I can't change what happened, I told her, but I'm not going to carry it anymore, either. That's the closest thing to forgiveness you're going to get from me. And it's enough. She nodded, tears in her eyes. And for the first time, I saw her as equally human, equally scarred. The more I let go, the lighter I felt. Old patterns lost their sting. The family that had once pushed me out had to face their own loss. They'd lost not just a daughter-in-law, but the certainty that came with their easy judgments. That was for them to carry now, not me. Still, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I'm not naive enough to believe that kindness can repair every break, or that my absence didn't change the fabric of that family forever. But it does mean moving forward without letting pain curdle into poison. I chose, even on the days when anger or sadness threatened to drag me under, to do something loving for myself. A long walk by the river, a slice of my favorite lemon pie. Time with friends who knew my truest self and loved me, not in spite of my scars, but because of them. Leaving Willow Springs again was different this time. I didn't run away. I planned my exit gently, saying real goodbyes. Before leaving, I walked past all my old haunts. The high school track, the bakery, the old house with its sagging porch. I let the memories sweep over me. Let myself feel the weight and the lightness at once. Then I drove out of town with the windows down, hair tangled in the wind, and not a single tear on my cheeks. In Seattle, my little bakery was waiting. So were my real friends, my garden, my dreams for bigger, sweeter things. The life I built from the rubble of old betrayals was honest, imperfect, but finally and completely my own. I forgave Willow Springs, not because it asked for forgiveness, but because I refused to let hate keep taking up room in a heart that had learned, against all odds, how to heal. Some nights, I'll think back and wonder if the next time I return to Oklahoma, there will be new stories, new understandings, new faces grateful for my example. Sometimes there's a letter waiting in my mailbox from someone who listened that day in the town square, who says my honesty helped them find their own voice. Whenever that happens, I'm reminded that true forgiveness is just the first chapter in a lifetime of becoming whole.